Sergeant Gibson.
Do what?
I shot Sergeant Gibson. I pulled a gun on him. Can you investigate me?
Is he breathing?
He just fell out.
That was the voice of police officer Michael Rusk calling 911 in James City County, Virginia in 2023, telling dispatch he had just shot his own sergeant after claiming he was about to be sexually assaulted. According to Rusk, Gibson had made prior unwanted advances, and that night the situation escalated when Gibson allegedly tried to force himself onto him. During the struggle, Rusk said he repeatedly told him to stop before pulling out his gun and firing several shots. Michael's father, Jason Rusk, said he told him about unwanted attention he received from his superior officer leading up to the shooting, and that he'd reported it to others in the department several times.
There was a year's worth of grooming that had taken place. Extremely inappropriate touching, stalking, the grooming, the previous to the incident, assaults.
Here's a video showing the officers at the bar prior to the shooting, where Gibson gets out of his seat to sit next to Rusk before reaching over to hold his hand, which Rusk appears to turn down. Then about an hour before the shooting, the two can be seen outside before apparently leaving together. Gibson puts his hand on Rusk's shoulder, and Rusk responds by pushing him away and pointing a finger in his face. It's unclear what happened next, but after the shooting, Rusk made this claim to the dispatcher.
I told him to stop. He kept going. Help me. Help.
Gibson was hit several times and survived after emergency surgery. When officers arrived, Rusk was still on the scene and was immediately taken into custody. Investigators said the physical evidence didn't fully support a clear-cut self-defense claim, leading to Rusk being charged with several felonies. In 2024, Rusk took a plea deal, avoiding active prison time, but losing his career in law enforcement and his right to carry a firearm. Here are some morbid facts about Steve Irwin. Steve Irwin spent his entire life working hands-on with animals that could kill him, and he openly said that if he ever died, it would likely be from wildlife. Throughout his career, he was constantly bitten, cut, and injured by snakes, lizards, and crocodiles. There were multiple close calls where crocodiles snapped inches from his body. He regularly handled some of the most venomous snakes in the world in remote areas, where a single bite could have easily been fatal before help arrived. This was one of the last photos ever taken of Steve off the coast of Queensland in 2006 before a stingray struck him with its tail, sending a barb through his chest and directly into his heart. Fatal stingray injuries like this are extremely rare, with fewer than 20 documented deaths worldwide since the 1950s. The barb was quickly pulled out during the emergency, which likely accelerated the bleeding, but the damage to his heart was already catastrophic either way. The moment was caught on camera, and the footage was reportedly destroyed before it was ever released. According to those present, his final words were reportedly, "I'm dying," before he went into cardiac arrest. The stingray is believed to have acted defensively as Steve approached from above. Despite decades of surviving encounters with some of the most dangerous animals on Earth, Steve died from a single rare defensive strike, the exact kind of risk he had always accepted. For decades, self-proclaimed psychic Sylvia Brown inserted herself into missing person cases, often delivering definitive claims to grieving families that were later proven false. In 1999, she told the grandmother of 6-year-old Opal Jo Jennings, who'd been abducted in Texas, that the girl was alive and being forced into slavery in Japan. In reality, Jennings had been murdered shortly after her disappearance, and her remains were found in Texas in 2003. In 2004, Sylvia appeared on The Montel Williams Show and told the mother of missing Ohio teen Amanda Berry that her daughter was dead. The girl's mother died in 2006, thinking she'd meet up with her daughter in heaven, but Amanda was found alive in 2013 after being held captive in Cleveland for a decade. Despite repeated inaccuracies, Sylvia continued making TV appearances and charging for readings until her death in 2013. In March of 1911, after a fire tore through the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City, rows of coffins were placed on display so grieving families could try to identify their loved ones. The blaze trapped workers on the upper floors of the Ash Building, where exit doors had been locked and fire escapes quickly collapsed. With no safe way out, many young immigrant women and girls took their own lives to avoid being buried alive as crowds watched from the street below. By the time the flames were extinguished, 146 people were dead. The disaster exposed brutal factory conditions and became one of the deadliest industrial workplace tragedies in American history. As a child, Michael's father Joseph would constantly torment him about his appearance, often calling him Fat Nose. Michael went on to have 4 rhinoplasties and was insecure about his appearance for his entire life. According to his former doctor, Conrad Murray, Michael's father chemically castrated him when he was a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. On one occasion in the 1960s, Joe wanted to teach his kids a lesson about leaving the windows open at night. So when little Michael was asleep, his father climbed through the window wearing a mask and screamed at him. From that point on, Michael would have recurring nightmares about being kidnapped from his bedroom. But the abuse didn't stop there. Joe would also hold onto a belt while the Jackson 5 rehearsed, ready to strike his children if one of them made a mistake. Michael was reportedly so terrified of his father that he would sometimes throw up just from merely being in his presence. He once said he felt the safest while performing on stage since his father wouldn't be able to beat him in front of a crowd. From a very young age, Michael described being forced into long, exhausting rehearsals for hours at a time, completely missing out on a normal childhood. He said watching other kids play from the window while he rehearsed was one of the memories that stayed with him the most. During an interview shortly before his death, Michael admitted he would often talk to child mannequins just to feel less alone. He would also frequently cry at the sight of kids playing in the park since it was something Michael would never experience himself. Michael had a meeting scheduled at the top of one of the Twin Towers on 9/11. After talking on the phone with his mom late into the night, he overslept and missed the appointment. Because of that phone call, he later credited his mother with saving his life. Here's a 1985 prediction of what Michael Jackson would look like in the year 2000 versus what he actually ended up looking like. As a result of a combination of skin conditions and body dysmorphia, Jackson went through nearly 100 procedures over 30 years trying to achieve his idea of perfection. In 2003, an entire supermarket was shut down so that Michael could live out his lifelong dream of shopping like an ordinary person. All the other shoppers were either paid actors or his friends, and they paid no attention to Michael. He played around the store like a child and even compared the experience to going to Disneyland. Before Jeffrey Epstein, there was John David Norman. In the early 1970s, across multiple U.S. states, Norman operated a trafficking network that exploited hundreds of boys, many of them vulnerable runaways or teenagers with no one looking for them. He built detailed lists of victims and buyers, distributing names, photos, and access through underground mail systems that connected offenders across state lines. Investigators later uncovered links between Norman's network and serial killers John Wayne Gacy and Dean Corll, both of whom were active during the same time and targeted young boys. When authorities seized Norman's materials, they reportedly found records suggesting his client list extended far beyond local offenders, with names believed to include individuals in positions of power, including federal employees. But in 1977, key records tied to those clients were destroyed by the Justice Department, effectively erasing the identities of many who may have been involved. Norman would go on to be arrested multiple times, but was never prosecuted, as much of the network he helped build was never fully uncovered. Here's an image showing what the sinking of the Titanic would have actually looked like on April 15, 1912. It was a moonless night in the North Atlantic, and once the ship's power failed, the massive liner disappeared into near total darkness, leaving over 1,500 people unable to clearly see the ship, the lifeboats, or even each other. Many survivors later reported hearing screams from the water but couldn't see anything, as the lack of light turned the disaster into something disorienting and almost invisible. It wasn't just the freezing temperatures that made it so horrifying, it was also the darkness, where one of the worst disasters in maritime history unfolded out of sight. In 1922, a young girl with severe diabetes was photographed while essentially waiting to die, at a time when the condition was almost always fatal, especially in children. Before there was any treatment, patients were often placed on near-starvation diets to slow the disease, leaving them dangerously weak while their bodies continued to deteriorate. That same year, doctors administered a new experimental treatment called insulin, one of the first times it had ever been used on a human. Within days, patients who were expected to die began to recover. The discovery transformed diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition almost overnight. Legendary artist Banksy may have finally been identified. For decades, the anonymous street artist has managed to keep his identity hidden while creating some of the most recognizable and politically charged artwork in the world. But a new investigation claims to have come closer than ever to confirming who's behind the name. Researchers analyzed years of evidence, including the location of artworks, travel patterns, and even past arrests tied to vandalism, and found they consistently aligned with a man named Robin Gunningham, a British man from Bristol who has long been suspected of being Banksy. Banksy. Some of the strongest evidence comes from geographic profiling, a technique often used in criminal investigations, which mapped where the artworks appeared and linked them to his known whereabouts. The investigation suggests the timing and placement of multiple pieces matches known movements, strengthening the theory that he's indeed the artist behind the legendary street art. However, Banksy's team has refused to confirm the claims, and his lawyer disputes key details in the investigation, leaving his identity officially unverified. This was the moment a random passenger was suddenly shoved toward an oncoming train at Northgate Station in Seattle, Washington. The attack was completely unprovoked, with the victim pushed dangerously close to the edge as the train approached, but he somehow managed to stay on the platform and survive. Police later identified the suspect as Alexander J., who was arrested and charged, with court records citing prior incidents and ongoing mental health concerns. Here's a clip of a cassowary chasing down a vehicle in what looks like something straight out of Jurassic Park. Native to parts of Australia and New Guinea, cassowaries can sprint up to 30 miles per hour and are considered one of the most dangerous birds on Earth. With dagger-like claws on each foot and a reputation for aggressive charges, they've been known to seriously injure or even kill humans, making them one of the closest real-life reminders of what dinosaurs may have been like. Here's a video of a 500-pound man being rescued from a 15-foot hole at a construction site in California. Officials said the man wasn't a construction worker and somehow ended up trapped at the bottom, prompting a large emergency response to lift him out. Crews had to carefully extract him due to his size and the depth of the hole, and he was taken to a hospital afterward, though how he got there remains unclear. Christopher John Sulos was a kind 37-year-old man with intellectual disabilities including autism, who worked as a beloved greeter at a Chick-fil-A in Charlotte, North Carolina. But one day in September of 2024, a customer said there was an emergency and asked to borrow his phone. Instead, they stole it from him and used it to try transferring money from his account. They then began sending harassing messages to him and his family, falsely accusing him of being a pervert and other serious sexual misconduct. The perpetrators soon threatened to spread these accusations to his employer and the public unless a ransom was paid. The relentless harassment and fear of public humiliation caused Sulos severe emotional distress. Believing he had genuinely done something wrong, he tragically took his own life just a few days later. His family and federal investigators linked the cyberstalking, extortion, and false accusations directly to his death. The people responsible were later convicted and sentenced to 27 and 41 months in prison. In 1823, near the Grand River in present-day South Dakota, American frontiersman Hugh Glass was brutally mauled by a grizzly bear, leaving him with a broken leg, a torn scalp exposing his skull, and deep claw wounds across his back and throat. Believing he would certainly die, two fellow trappers assigned to watch him abandoned him and stole his weapons and supplies. But against all odds, Glass miraculously survived. With no gear and barely able to move, he set his own broken leg and began dragging himself across the wilderness while tracking down the men who had betrayed him. To prevent infection, he reportedly let maggots consume the dead flesh in his wounds, survived on berries and roots, and once scared wolves off a bison carcass so he could eat it. After crawling roughly 200 miles through the frontier, Glass reached Fort Kiowa on the Missouri River, completing one of the most legendary survival stories in American history and inspiring the Revenant. For nearly 6 years, a woman named Lydia Abate has searched obituaries to find recently deceased people and contacted their families offering free estate cleanouts. In exchange, she requests to keep the vintage clothing left behind by the deceased. By collecting garments from the estates of people who have died, Abate has built an entire wardrobe and said she hasn't had to buy clothes in years. In 1998, during an Olympic Airways flight from Athens to New York City, a passenger suffered a severe asthma attack after being seated near the smoking section. His wife repeatedly asked a flight attendant to move him away from the cigarette smoke, but she was first told there were no empty seats and later that the crew was too busy. The man's condition worsened during the flight and he later died from the attack. His widow sued the airline and was eventually awarded about $1.4 million in damages.
Hechtenis dient te worden op.
That was the moment a grieving father threw a chair at a judge inside a Dutch courtroom after hearing the sentence for the man responsible for killing his family members. In 2013, a speeding driver lost control of his car in Mayol, Netherlands, striking and killing a 2-year-old girl and her grandparents as they rode bicycles. The driver was initially sentenced to just 120 hours of community service and a 1-year suspended license, a ruling that sparked outrage in the courtroom. Prosecutors later appealed, and the sentence was increased to 15 months in prison and a 4-year driving ban. Elderly elderly Englishman Stan Beaton kept a voicemail greeting recorded years earlier that included the voice of his wife Ruby, who died of cancer in 2003. For more than a decade, he would play the message almost every day just to hear her voice again. When a telecommunications system upgrade accidentally deleted the recording, engineers at the phone company spent several days searching archive servers until they were finally able to recover it. When the message was played for him again during a BBC interview, Beaton broke down in tears after hearing his wife's voice for the first time since it was lost. That was the sound of gunshots echoing through the streets during the siege of Sarajevo in the Bosnian War. During the siege, civilians lived under constant sniper fire from soldiers positioned in the surrounding mountains. Between 1992 and 1995, more than 10,000 people were killed in the city, including at least 1,500 children. Decades later, investigators finally uncovered extremely disturbing evidence suggesting some of those sniper positions were used for what became known as the Sarajevo Sniper Safari. According to testimony in ongoing criminal investigations, wealthy foreign visitors allegedly paid tens of thousands of dollars to Bosnian Serb forces for the opportunity to fire at innocent civilians trapped inside the besieged city. Witnesses claim the visitors were escorted to hillside sniper nests overlooking Sarajevo, where they could shoot at people crossing streets or running between buildings. Some reports even described a price list for targets, with higher payments allegedly associated with killing children. Italian prosecutors opened a war crimes investigation in 2025, and the first suspect has been formally placed under investigation for multiple counts of murder related to the alleged sniper tourism. In November of 2020, Zhang Bo and his girlfriend Yi Cheng-chen murdered Zhang's 2 young children by throwing them from a 15th-floor apartment in Chongqing. Investigators eventually determined the killings were planned. Yi reportedly viewed the children as obstacles to her future with Zhang, while Zhang disabled surveillance cameras and waited until neighbors were unlikely to notice before carrying out the horrific act. After the deaths, he attempted to portray the incident as an accident, even returning to the scene and showing visible grief. Medical examiners confirmed both children died from multiple traumatic injuries consistent with the high-rise fall. Chinese courts described the crime as extremely cruel and noted the betrayal of parental duty as an aggravating factor. Both defendants were sentenced to death in 2021. Appeals were rejected, and the sentences were approved by China's Supreme People's Court. The executions were carried out in January of 2024. In Osaka, Japan, 23-year-old cosplayer Saki Sato was arrested after police say she cut off part of her 21-year-old boyfriend's ring finger with a hatchet and stored it inside the refrigerator. Authorities allege she had previously cut off his left nipple with scissors and exerted extreme control over his finances and phone. The victim himself eventually contacted police, leading officers to discover the preserved finger. Sato denied intentionally mutilating him, claiming he hurt himself, but prosecutors charged her with multiple counts of assault. If convicted, she faces significant prison time under Japan's criminal injury statutes. In August of 2010, dismissed Filipino officer Rolando Mendoza hijacked a tour bus carrying Hong Kong visitors in Manila, demanding his job be reinstated after corruption charges. The standoff dragged on for nearly 11 hours and was broadcast live, with negotiations collapsing after Mendoza's brother, who was trying to mediate, was arrested by authorities. As tensions escalated, Mendoza opened fire on the hostages, while police launched a chaotic rescue attempt that drew heavy criticism for poor coordination. The crisis ended when a police sniper finally killed Mendoza, but 8 tourists were dead and several others injured, sparking diplomatic fallout between Hong Kong and the Philippines. This was the moment a 5-year-old girl was attacked by a raccoon while waiting for her school bus in Connecticut. The animal suddenly bit into her leg, refusing to let go as she screamed and kicked. Hearing the screams, her mother ran outside and grabbed the raccoon with her bare hands, prying it off her daughter. She held on to the animal and restrained it as her daughter ran inside, keeping control of it while making sure another child nearby was no longer in danger. Once she was certain the situation was under control, the mother yeeted the raccoon away, ending the attack. The girl suffered multiple puncture wounds to her leg, though doctors later said her genes likely prevented far more serious damage. Raccoons almost never attack people, especially during daylight, and because of the animal's extreme aggression, doctors feared rabies exposure. Both the mother and daughter were required to undergo emergency rabies treatment, but they eventually made a full recovery. This video captures the moment a brown bear emerges from its den after nearly 7 months of hibernation, stepping out pale, scruffy, and visibly disoriented after surviving an entire winter without eating, drinking, or going to the bathroom. During hibernation, a bear's heart rate drops dramatically, its body lives off of stored fat, and its muscles barely weaken despite months of total inactivity. When they finally wake up, they can lose up to 40% of their body weight and often look confused and unstable as their organs slowly restart, making this first walk one of its most vulnerable moments of the year. Here's some extremely rare footage of a deep-sea crowned jellyfish filmed by a drone nearly a mile deep underwater, an animal so seldom seen that most records come from a small handful of deep-sea ROV encounters. With its long pointed tentacles and crown-like shape, it looks more like an alien or deep-sea monster than an animal, drifting through complete darkness under immense pressure. Clear footage of such fragile creatures at this depth is considered highly scientifically valuable because they're so rarely seen alive in their natural environment. In 2024, 17-year-old Sha Ray was the sole survivor of a family murder-suicide after police say his father killed his mother, his 11-year-old brother, and his 8 and 2-year-old sisters before turning the gun on himself. Sha Ray was found alive in the family garage with a gunshot wound to his head. He miraculously survived, but the injury left him permanently blind and facing lifelong medical complications. Despite the trauma and severe injuries, Sha Ray went on to enroll at the University of Utah in 2025, beginning his freshman year just months after losing his entire immediate family. Tragically, just 1 week after starting college, he passed away from natural causes. In Tewkesbury, England, 56-year-old Amanda Nixon, a mother of 10, was found guilty of essentially holding a female slave captive in her home for 25 years, exploiting her as a forced domestic servant under harrowing conditions. Wixon brought the victim into her household in the mid-1990s when she was a teenager with learning difficulties, and over the next quarter century kept her locked inside, regularly physically abusing her, strangling her, hitting her with a broom handle hard enough to knock her teeth out, squirting detergent down her throat, splashing bleach on her face, and forcibly shaving her head. Prosecutors told the court that Wixon deprived her of food, basic hygiene, medical and dental care, and any freedom to leave, even collecting state benefits paid on the victim's behalf while the victim lived in squalor. Wixon denied all the charges, blamed her son for the situation, and showed no remorse, dismissing the convictions as rubbish and refusing to express regret, as jurors convicted her of false imprisonment, forced labor, and assault after hearing evidence of the decades of cruelty.